Keir Starmer on X says, "We are facing a once-in-a-generation moment for the collective security of our continent. This is the time for all of us to step up." What, all of us? All of us, Keir. Are you going to be stepping up? Seems to me you're just going to be swanning around, eating fillet steak and drinking fine wine whilst collecting a massive salary and doing less work than John Wayne's safety catch. Seems to me like the only people stepping up are going to be the public that despises you. You aren't going to be stepping up, are you? Are your kids going to be fighting in the war? This reminds me of Tony Blair. When we invaded Iraq, I remember that day well. I was part of the initial invasion. We were in Kuwait 6 or 7 weeks before the war started, in the middle of the desert, didn't know what was going on, and the news came out that Tony and Cherie Blair were crying on the TV because they were sending Ewan Blair, their spoiled, brain-dead son, on a free scholarship to Harvard or Yale or whatever top American university it was. And there was a lot of angry wives because they were saying on the satellite phones to their husbands who were getting ready to launch an invasion of Saddam Hussein's Iraq on the fictional premise that he had weapons of mass destruction. And as we all know, it sounds like they did David Kelly in. And at the culmination of the war, it turned out that there was more weapons of mass destruction under me nana's fridge than you would find in Saddam's Iraq. But I'm rambling. Those wives were ringing their husbands and saying, "Yeah, it's a bit weird this. Tony and Cherie Blair were crying on the telly because they were sending Ewan to some posh university that he got backdoored into. But I didn't cry when we had to deploy my husband to a war zone with no idea what was happening or when he was coming back." And this is eerily reminiscent of that, isn't it? Because he's talking about, we all have to step up. But no, he won't step up. And his kids won't step up, and none of our MPs will step up, and none of our lying, dirty, slimy, stinking, four-flushing, scum-sucking politicians, or those in the House of Lords or the House of Commons, will do anything other than trouser some cash from the arms manufacturers. Give it to their mentally ill children to put up the nose, Diane Abbott, or just do nothing while your kids go and get the legs and arms blown off or turned to paste in a war heavily linked to Joe Biden's crackhead son, Burisma, and rampant, naked, brazen corruption. So today we're going to talk about that, and I'm going to explain to you why, if you do your duty in this day and age, we are so sorely led you're not doing your duty. If you join the military or deploy to Ukraine, you are directly supporting grooming gangs, the mass torture and sexual assault of English children, mandates, lockdowns, the Azov battalion, Hunter Biden's crack addiction, full-blown November Alpha Zulu Indias roaming around in Ukraine, getting up to God knows what. What else? Dawn raids on your house for mean tweets. Jail for being rude to European politicians. The worst type of authoritarianism. So I say this with no hint of irony. After serving my country for 10 years in an elite commando unit and going to war 5 times, if you take the plunge now, you're fighting for this. Yep, there we are. That's the nest of vipers in Paris yesterday. That's what you're fighting for. Mark Rutte and Ursula von der Scheiße and Keir Starmer and Donald Tusk. I thought we were rid of him years ago. And Olaf and Macron. And it's a bit weird. Keir is Catamite sat a seat away from him. So, are you going to do your part? I would hope not. I've never seen a room packed with that much scum since Johnny Cash played a packed gig at a maximum security penitentiary. Right, ladies and gents, how are you doing? First things first, let's watch this video that Keir's put up for us, which proves that we're definitely all doing our part, except, his kids.
I want to thank President Macron for convening us this evening. At stake is not just the future of Ukraine, it is an existential question for Europe as a whole, and therefore vital for Britain's national interest. This is a once-in-a-generation moment for the collective security of our continent. Only a lasting peace in Ukraine that safeguards its sovereignty will deter Putin from further aggression in the future. In this moment, we have to recognise the new era that we are in, not cling hopelessly to the comforts of the past. It's time for us to take responsibility for our security, for our continent. And I've been clear today Britain will take a leading responsibility, as we always have, because Ukraine must have a secure future, Europe must have a secure future, Britain must have a secure future, and democratic values must prevail.
Preposterous. Preposterous. Every element of that video was preposterous. It was the polar opposite of the truth. It was a truth black hole. And talking in such absolutes, the Russians were our allies against Napoleon and Adolf. But he's making out as if the collection of lying degenerates that rule over the EU and are locking people up daily for tweeting things that they don't like the worst type of authoritarian statists. They're the good guys. They're the good guys. The people that covered up the mass torture and surprise sex of tens of thousands of little girls, they're the good guys. Of course they are. Also, existential crisis. They need to make their mind up. They talked for years about how the Russians were useless losers and they're all drunk and their aircraft carriers don't work and the Navy's a joke. And they can't take over Ukraine because they've been trying, apparently. But what? They can't even take over half of Ukraine. But if we don't pour money and meat into the grinder, what they're going to do? Barnstorm across Europe? Is Poland, the Czech Republic, Italy and Belgium going to fall to the Russians, is it? Is this where we are? And do they think everybody watching doesn't pay attention to world affairs? This is a complex issue. There was a coup. There was constant sabre rattling from the European Union. They expanded east when they promised they wouldn't. Nobody's saying Putin's blameless, but it seems far more complicated than it looks. And then you've got, to cap it all off, clearly the old pipeline that got blew up wasn't the Russians doing it. And clearly the president's son, who was getting paid millions of dollars by Burisma, despite having zero qualifications, had something to do with it. Ultimately, this whole issue boils down to a simple issue of trust. Do you trust the scum that lord it over Europe to have your best interests at heart? The same people that turned a blind eye to your kids getting diddled, that have locked up hundreds of innocent people for merely being impolite on Twitter. The same people that said this with a straight face. They're the good guys. It's a crime to insult someone, unless they're doing it. If they just slur 100 million Europeans and call them all ists and isms till the cows come home with zero evidence. If they call Donald Trump names endlessly for 8 years, that's not a crime. If they pose with his head on the front of a magazine cover, a severed head, and promote murdering him, as dozens of well-known celebrities did, that's fine. That's fine. You can do that. But if I go on the internet, apparently, and say that geggy sparrow-born soy boy in the middle is such a testosterone black hole, he has to thumb it in like a piece of old rope if he wants to belt one into his missus. Apparently, I've just committed a crime and I should go to prison for a very long time. These are the people you're supporting. If you support war in Europe, led by the worst type of lying, demonstrably dishonest, authoritarian scum. So think very wisely before you enlist in the military or do your duty. The word is now a mockery to sham. If you're already in, just put your notice in. There's more important things in life than money. You can find another job, but you won't be able to glue your conkers back on if they get blasted 400 feet over a warehouse in eastern Ukraine, while Ursula and Macron and Kia turn a blind eye to grooming gangs and human trafficking and engage in their degenerate parties in whatever palaces they're in. They didn't do anything about Silvio Berlusconi, did they? They'll just turn a blind eye to it, but they'll happily see your children turned into scorched meat in order to line their pockets. It's very apt, really. We're living in upside down world and we are the baddies now. We are the baddies. If you trust the leaders of the EU and the British government, I think you've got a screw loose. But that's just me. I would suggest the evidence points us that way, but I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you think you should be locked up for being a little bit rude to a big, fat, sweaty politician? Do you think dawn raids are an acceptable practice for disagreeing politely with the government on the internet? And do you think, after all of this, all the cover-ups and the lies, and the gangs and the trafficking, and all of the thousands of people locked up for nothing, all of the authoritarianism, all of the cronyism, do you actually think the leaders of Europe are the goodies in this situation? because I don't. Anyway, that's me for the day. As usual, let me know what your thoughts are. If you're mentally ill, please put an asterisk next to your comment so I can, pass your details on to the local loony bin. And I'll see you all tomorrow, all right? Thanks for tuning in. Toodle pip. Cheers.